Every system you live inside was once temporary. Kings ruled until they didn't. Empires rose, expanded, and eventually collapsed. Currencies appeared, lost trust, and disappeared into history. Even the longest-lasting institutions were created with a shared assumption that one day they would end. But the system you live inside now is different. It was not designed to be completed. It was not designed to be resolved. It was designed to continue. And that single, fundamental difference changes everything. At first glance, it doesn't even look like a system. It just looks like normal life. You are born, you go to school, you work, you earn, you spend, you save, and if you're lucky, you retire. Governments change, leaders come and go, markets rise and fall. It all feels dynamic, almost organic, full of motion. But beneath that constant motion is something static, something carefully and quietly reinforced over centuries. A structure whose primary goal is not progress, but persistence. To understand it, you have to stop looking at individual problems and start looking at incentives. Systems don't respond to morality. They don't care about good intentions. They respond to rewards. Whatever is rewarded expands. Whatever is punished or ignored disappears. And in the modern world, the most rewarded behavior is not solving problems. It is managing them. If you go back far enough in history, you'll find a different rhythm to life. In earlier societies, crises were meant to end. A famine passed. A war concluded. A plague receded. A debt was either repaid or defaulted upon. When something broke, it was either fixed or it was abandoned. Failure had real, immediate consequences, and resolution was not just a hope, it was an expectation. But slowly, over generations, that expectation changed. The shift didn't happen because people suddenly became greedy or malicious. It happened because stability became more valuable than truth. Once populations grew large enough, once economies became deeply interconnected, once the cost of a total collapse became too terrifying to contemplate, leaders began prioritizing continuity above all else. Suddenly, ending a problem became dangerous. Maintaining it became the safer, more rational choice. Debt is a perfect example of this transformation. Debt was once a temporary tool. It was borrowed for a specific purpose, repaid, and then cleared. The loop was closed. But a system built on the idea of continuous, perpetual growth cannot allow debt to simply disappear. If debt ends, money contracts. If money contracts, economies stall or even collapse. So, debt was transformed. It went from being a problem to be solved into a foundation to be built upon. It became something not to eliminate, but to endlessly roll forward, manage, and expand. You can see the same pattern appear almost everywhere you look. Education was once meant to cultivate understanding, to develop critical thought, and enlighten the individual. Over time, it became a pipeline. It began standardizing thought, producing predictable outcomes, and feeding labor into existing economic structures. The goal quietly shifted from learning to placement, from wisdom to employability. The system didn't need free thinkers, it needed reliable components. Healthcare followed a similar path. Prevention is unpredictable, it's slow, and it's hard to monetize. Treatment, on the other hand, is measurable, it's billable, and it's repeatable. A system that financially depends on the existence of illness will never prioritize health too strongly. It's not a conspiracy, it's just an incentive structure. What gets rewarded expands. Politics, too, has changed its very nature. It was once primarily about making decisions and setting a direction for a society. Today, it is largely about management and optics. Problems have stopped being solved and have started being narrated. Why? Because a solved issue ends the flow of funding, it ends media attention, it ends political relevance. But a managed issue, one that is perpetually on the brink of being solved, can sustain careers indefinitely. This is the core pattern. Resolution closes loops. Maintenance keeps them open. And in our world, open loops are profitable. They are stable. They are predictable. Over time, any system that had a natural endpoint was slowly replaced by a system that could adapt. Not adapt to fix itself, but adapt to survive criticism, to absorb shocks, and to continue operating with only minimal structural change. Crises stopped being warnings. They became features of the system itself. Think about it. Economic crashes, social unrest, environmental degradation. Each one is framed by the media and our leaders as urgent, unprecedented, and alarming. And yet, after each one, the fundamental system remains. It's slightly adjusted, perhaps slightly expanded with new regulations or departments, but it is rarely questioned at its core. That is not an accident. That is by design. A system that was meant to end must be accountable for its results. A system that is meant to continue forever only needs to be resilient. And resilience, in this context, doesn't mean strength. It means flexibility without transformation. The most effective modern systems don't resist pressure, they redirect it. They offer surface-level reforms that carefully preserve the fundamentals. They encourage fierce debates that cleverly avoid the root causes. They propose solutions that actually create new forms of dependency. Every attempt to escape the system is converted into another layer of participation within it. Even dissent is absorbed and monetized. Protests become viral content. Criticism becomes a brand. Rebellion becomes an aesthetic you can buy. Nothing truly threatens the system, as long as it operates within the rules of the system itself. This is why the system feels impossible to escape, yet surprisingly easy to survive inside. It doesn't demand your belief. It doesn't require your approval. It only demands your participation. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to rely on it. For your income, for your security, for your identity, for your sense of meaning. And once that reliance is established, permanence naturally follows. The most powerful part of this entire structure isn't force or coercion. It's normalization. When something has always been there, for your entire life and the lives of your parents, it stops looking like something that was designed. It starts looking inevitable, like a law of nature. People stop asking who benefits from the way things are, and they start asking how they can best adapt to it. That is the moment a system stops being questioned, not because it's perfect, but because any alternative has become unimaginable. And that is the final, most brilliant evolution of a system that was never meant to end. Not control through coercion, but continuity through dependence. Understanding this doesn't require outrage. It doesn't demand fear. It only requires awareness. Because once you truly see that many of the world's biggest problems persist not because they are unsolvable, but because their continuation is useful to the system itself, your entire perspective changes. You stop asking, "Why hasn't this been fixed yet?" And you start asking, "What would happen if it were?" And in that question, quietly, the journey to a new way of thinking begins. Thanks for watching.